I'm here. I'm very, very excited about this episode. I'm here with someone I'm very fascinated with because he is one of the rare individuals who can speak to my professional field while also being involved in it and not just speculating and bullshitting. I'm here with Disgraced Propagandist. Now, you can find him as the creator of the Carousel, the carousel.substack.com. He's also on Twitter or X at Disgraced Prop. And perhaps most relevant to this discussion, he is I will call the founder of Will the Agency. You can find that at willtheagency.com. I would describe it to people as a marketing and advertising and also a branding agency that seeks to do work with this broad sector called the dissident, right? And I think, unless I'm mistaken, you did some work recently with Charles Haywood. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did a little work with Charles Haywood, yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And I've been a fan of your Substack, as I said, the Carousel. And there's a few things I would like to point people to. Maybe we'll discuss it on this episode as well. Maybe we won't get around to it because there's a lot I'd love to talk about. But the pieces that I could recommend the most, there's a series you did on the road to consumer nationalism. What parts? 1, 2, and 3. There's also
there's four of those.
Four, actually. Okay,
Yeah,
I only read the first 3.
Yeah,
Another one, Vibe Shift to Destroy Marketing World, and also Welcome to Post Cool. And I think there's a lot of people who have maybe commented on a lot of cultural changes that might be using some marketing terminology. And a lot, I think when you read these articles, you can really get to the source of what's going on. And you do a lot of discussions on sort of wokeness and propaganda. Would that be correct?
Yeah. I have done some treatise-ish work, even though, that is not my favorite type of stuff to write, but I have, or, it's actually easier for me to write, but I'm not, this type of big brain think piece I've done some of this, and the things that I've done my big brain think pieces on have essentially been to all answer the same question, which is the why behind woke marketing. And I think that I got really lucky because I sort of started on that project shortly before Bud Light happened. And I think Bud Light was such a massive global moment that we're still seeing the results of, frankly. And so, yeah, that's been kind of my beat, at least as a analytical thinker, which is really only a small part of what I do. But yeah, that's been my beat for a little while.
And I was curious because I was saying before the show, and listeners of the show will be familiar with my background, but I've worked in agencies, primarily in the Toronto area. I don't live there anymore, but when I lived there, a lot of agencies, large and medium size. I've also worked client side in their marketing departments, and with startups as well. And you have a lot of stories on your Substack and a lot of insight. And I was just curious if you wanted to maybe go into, and this is one of those annoying questions you would get in a boardroom, but like, tell us your story, like what I'm very interested to hear your odyssey in the world of marketing.
Sure. So, this is my shtick, my spiel that I give to people all the time. Are we live right now, or are we?
Yeah, I'm recording right now. Yeah,
be recording, but we're not live.
Not live. Yeah, no.
Okay. So
I should do live though. I do have the ability to do live. I just haven't gotten that part set up yet. Some people prefer recorded. Because sometimes they prefer later on, they'll say, oh, can you remove this? Or I said something I want censored, and then they have the chance to. But I don't think you have anything to worry about with that.
No, I'm not worried about it at all. I was actually just wondering. But I've experimented with the live a little bit, and I just don't like it. It's like not. I think some people really thrive on the live. I don't like dealing with
also, that's why I like audio only, because I know there's a lot of people who do video, but I noticed that a wave of relief seems to hit them when they know they don't need to put on a fancy shirt or do their hair or whatever.
Yeah, right. Definitely. Yeah, especially with the female. I've noticed in recording my podcast that women cancel like 10 times more than men. I don't know if you've ever had
Really?
women on this podcast. Yeah, it's amazing. It's like when I have an upcoming like recording with a man, there's probably 8 out of 10 chance that he's going to show up, maybe even 9 out of 10. If I have an upcoming show scheduled with a woman, there's like a 3 out of 10 chance that they will come to the first recording that we have scheduled. They'll always reschedule it like a couple of times.
And you know what? I've been ghosted by a couple
Yeah.
of women. I'm not going to name their names, but I did
Mhm.
notice that more often. And I'm going to take an extra step here and say I've noticed that even with professional meetings as well, now that I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. It's and I think a big part of that is, as you just said, it's like I think women feel the pressure to like get ready for it, and so if like a woman isn't feeling like they're looking good, or if they've like done their makeup or whatever enough, I think that they're probably more likely to
Not ready to step into the
say
autistic
no. Yeah.
Thunderdome with the rest of us.
Yeah, right. Dude, your voice sounds so much like. Do you know who Last Things is?
Yep. I actually I spoke with him recently for his last picture show festival.
Oh, you were on it.
First time I'd ever really talked to him too, but I did notice that.
Dude, your guys' voices are like identical. There's a few guys in our space that are like that, actually, who's like, we have weird like voice physiognomy like similarities.
And I also think it comes from, for me, it's years of listening to yourself in post-production. And I think when people are forced to listen to their own voice, they kind of self-correct, and maybe we all start self-correcting to this sort of, very self-aware, not like a transatlantic drawl, but whatever the podcast version of that is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, we're talking about your history in the world of marketing, because you also had another Substack about like the Longhouse and working around females and stuff
Well,
like that.
that was
It's
actually
very
not by
interesting.
me. That was a guest post from a friend of mine laboring in the Longhouse. But yes, I have written quite a bit about this. So yeah, I'll tell you my story. So I went to law school. And then I graduated law school. I graduated at the top of my, or pretty close to the top of my class. I was on law review, which is sort of like the best thing you can be in law school. But I realized kind of halfway through that I really, really did not want to practice law. And it was like killing me. Like it was like literally like eating me up. Like
If
I
you don't mind me
couldn't.
asking, what was it about that? Because a lot of people you hear like, "Oh, I should have become a lawyer because I'm good at arguing" or something. But what would you say was what kind of drove you from it?
Well, I'm not just good at arguing. I'm great at arguing. So I'm like extremely good at arguing, particularly in the written form. I'm much better in writing than I am in talking, because I get too angry and like uncontrolled in talking. Whereas you really need to be a great verbal talking arguer. You really need to have a calm disposition, which I don't have. But in writing, I was really good. I was, I got, I think maybe the best grade in my class, or the second best grade in legal writing, which is quite difficult in American law school. American law school is a extremely difficult intellectual challenge. And I really figured out how to do that well. And so what sucks about law though is really just the lifestyle of it, to me, seemed so absurdly horrible, because you're in a fluorescent. First of all, law is like not cool at all. There is no such thing as a cool lawyer. Lawyers are not cool people ever. It's like really nerdy, not like creative types of people, right? It's similar to being a doctor. It's not like you're going to go to a party of doctors and there's going to be like, any sort of cultural clout there at all. So, that was something that was really missing for me, that I didn't really understand until later. But I would go to my law firm job in New Orleans. So I went to law school at Tulane, and I would sit there all day and I was supposed to, like do stuff on the computer and read stuff and write arguments and fill out paperwork. And, I was supposed to do that for like 12 hours a day. Like, that's like, if you're going to succeed in law, you're supposed to be one of these. I mean, this is kind of dying because meritocracy is dying in general, right? So it's probably like 50% easier to be a lawyer today than back when I was doing it, at least in most areas, probably in New Orleans for sure, because it's like not a top legal market. But law was like finance, in where it was like a pie eating contest where the uh, reward is more pie. It was like, it was like, if you want to be a great lawyer, you got to get in there at 6 a.m. and fucking, be on call at all times. And it was a lot of like performative hard working, right? And I was, not only did I not want to do it, I was literally incapable of doing it. I could not do it. I would sit down and I would like, it'd be a Friday or a Thursday, and I would like think about sitting in this fucking chair all day and until for 12 hours, like doing citations in a fluorescently lit room, like just sitting there. And I was like, I can't do this. I was like, I'm not going to spend my life doing this. It's just not a fucking option. Like I had to move around. I had to like move my body around. Like I couldn't just fucking sit there. It was like not possible for me to do it. I probably could do it now, just because I'm so much older, and you kind of relax and you become more sedentary and more able to do that stuff. But at 25 years old, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't sit and play that game. So I pretty much fucked off. I mean, after I made Law Review, I pretty much fucked off for 2 years. I like, I spent all my time at those fancy law firms, like flirting with girls, playing hooky, going and like drinking during the day and smoking weed with people. Like I pretty much just like abandoned my role there. I was like ranked very last on the Law Review because I just never did anything for it. Like once I made it, because you don't have to. Once you make it, like there's no point in even participating, because it doesn't get you anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I had kind of like I don't want to say a mental breakdown. I didn't have a mental breakdown, but I definitely had a little bit of a mental break-ish. I mean, like it's not like I pretty much had like 3 months of feeling totally horrible, like the worst I've ever felt in my entire life, like real, like emergency level terrible. And the way I got out of that was by sort of mentally committing to being a writer, to being not just a legal writer, but a creative writer, whether that fiction or not. But I mean,
I was going to
and
say,
it wasn't fiction, but
just your last point. This is something I talked to a couple of people about, because I've spoken to people in my own circles who have felt what you were feeling, and they're around the same age you'd have been as well. I'm in my mid-30s, so that's basically 75 in this scene. But the idea, they're like, why do I feel this way? I'm like, well, usually when you get into doing something at the start, it's chaotic and it's interesting, but everyone has a moment where they kind of peek their head over the trenches and they realize, oh, I'm actually going to do this for the next 50 years. Even parents get that too. If anyone has any kids, like once you have a kid, it's crazy. But after like 8-9 months, like you get used to it, and then you stop and it's like, oh my God, I actually am going to do this for another like 17 years.
yeah,
And then,
right,
then something,
right.
sometimes something breaks. You're like, holy shit, what the fuck am I going to do?
Yeah.
And the same thing happened. But, and the idea is that I guess you got to pick something where you enjoy the shittiest part of it. Because before I got into marketing, I worked in restaurants. So I went to culinary school, and I was just like, I worked in fine dining. I worked in diners, everything in between. And I'm like, I felt the same thing. I'm like, I can't fucking do this. I'm going to kill myself eventually.
Yeah, right.
And there's some people that love it, and bet like the Matty Mathesons of the world, it's good for them. But if it ain't in you, it's like it'll destroy you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it will destroy you. I think, like, again, I remember talking to the number 2 on the Law Review, who was this guy named Mark who Tulane Law is a like graveyard of broken musical dreams because because it's in New Orleans. So like New Orleans is like a music destination. It's kind of like a like a third rate Nashville type of thing, and so a lot of musicians who are like real, basically giving up on being a musician and going and being a lawyer because they're, like upper middle class white people and that's just like what they do. And they don't have the balls to actually go all the way, right? So a lot of those people are there. And the number 2 guy on the law review, like one of the best, the standout of our class, I really wonder what he's doing now. I was just endlessly complaining about being on law review. And I was just endlessly like saying even what I'm saying now to people, which was like, how do you do this? Like, how do you literally go in there day after day, sit there for 14 hours and then go home? Like, I couldn't, how do you live that way? Like, I don't even understand how you do it. And he kind of pulled me aside and said, look, man, the key is to do something you don't like, but just trick yourself into thinking you do like it, right? And that his advice really bothered me, largely because in a sense, he's right. Like in a sense, a strong person learns how to take the difficult parts of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and to love them, to find some, I do all kinds of shit I hate doing, but I try and find a way to like it anyway. You know what I mean? And so it was good advice, right? But, and again, like, I think if I'd been a stronger person, I would have seen the incredible opportunity that I had in front of me. Like I'm at the top of a class at a great law school. If I just play by the rules and, say the right things, like I'm going to be rich as fuck in 10 years. Right. I mean, I'll be a prominent rich man wherever I am. If I had a longer vision, I would have just shut the fuck up and dealt with it, right? And tried to find a way to enjoy it and, popped Adderall and fucking drank in the closet by myself and, do whatever I had to do, But I was not mature enough at that time to do that. I still, my like prefrontal cortex or whatever was just not developed enough to do that. I was still too wild. I was like like a horse that just had not been broken yet, And so I squandered. I mean, dude, I'm still in debt from law school, man. I'm still buried in debt. It was a huge squandered opportunity, On the other hand, thank fucking God for that. I mean, thank God I was so weak as to not be able to go through that because, man, like, I'm very glad, as rich as I would be, I'm glad that I'm not a lawyer, and I'm glad that I found the path that I did find. I'm happy I did.
So have you seen, and we'll move on to some marketing related stuff, but since you had left the legal side of things, have you noticed your former profession getting overrun with, because I remember, full disclosure, many years ago, I was working in a law firm myself in Toronto. I was the marketing manager. And so I got to see, it was a pretty cool one too. And there's a lot of like high powered lawyers there. And, I got to exist outside of that, but within proximity to it. And even I was noticing at the time, you'd see that like legal blogs are just as preposterous as anything else in this culture, like abovethelaw.com and all these other like insider legal blogs and websites. They're about as bad as Adweek. It's all diversity stuff.
Yes,
It's all what you might call woke stuff. And even back then I was noticing, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of race stuff going on here. So I am concerned with even a mind like yourself on a long enough timeline just getting washed right out because they don't even want you anymore. Now, is that maybe my assessment is wrong? Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, what do you mean? Say a little bit more about what do you mean? What do you mean they don't want you anymore?
Well, like I remember when I was working at the law firm, there's a lot of like white guys, Jewish guys, and even they were talking like, should we not be on the website? Like, do we need to have more women? Do we need to
Yes.
have more Asian women? And they were already talking about everything they can do to promote diversity internally. Even the partners were talking about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm concerned with, being a man or being a, right wing adjacent, let's say, in your beliefs on a long enough timeline, would you just start losing out to, black women? Because, again, this might be just something I've heard because I'm not legal mind, but I remember even on like on the judge circuit, like lower circuit court judges, like they're almost all black women now. I'm like, how the fuck did
Yeah.
that happen? But it just seems
Right.
like there's been a sea change going on. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, is that true in your case, or am I just way off?
Well, but the problem with what you're saying is the alternative is going into marketing where all of those things are 10 times worse than in law. You're way better off as a white dude in law than you are in marketing. Marketing is the worst thing you could go into as a white man, like
I can speak
that's
to that.
the
Like I've been
absolute
told straight up
worst.
that I won't get a job at most big
Yeah.
agencies
Oh,
now.
yeah. Forget about it, man. So, yeah, no, I mean, law is still, just by the nature of it, is still somewhat meritocratic. And, law people are also very smart. And so, yeah, like that's why auto admit is so successful, right? That's like the 4chan of law, right? Because law people know the score, man. Like I had friends who went and worked at the big New York firms, the white shoe firms that everybody wants to work at. And these were liberal people, but they would joke about the, diversity hires all the time. They would be like, what the fuck? Like, like Andre didn't fucking come to work for 3 days in a row. Like I can't, I can't get away with that at all. Like they would all complain about it.
See, that's what I
Uh,
was trying to get at because I was trying to figure out if the revealed preference on the law side is more pronounced because my sense is on the marketing side is that there's not everyone, but more firms and agencies that really take that stuff seriously.
The marketing is 1 million times worse because marketing doesn't have any backstop. I mean, law, after you can't be that bad at law without really it being very obvious. Whereas you can be very, very bad at marketing for a very long time and no one will notice.
It's
No one will
stunning.
actually notice.
Okay, can I just say this? I got a story for that for people. I don't think I told this on the show, but my wife had a boss at one of her agencies years ago, and he was headhunted to become their director of operations. Basically, his job, the title and the job, oftentimes in marketing, are not congruent. His job was just to bring in clients, right? And he was headhunted. They paid something to the tune of $10,000 to a headhunting agency to bring in this guy. And he's a nice guy. I never met him, but it sounded like he was nice, and he had a nice track record, resume. But it turns out he was just a total alcoholic, but a rich alcoholic, which is the best type of alcoholic to be because you can afford to get like weird blood transfusions every 2 weeks, which is what he did. He paid for a service to like hook himself some fucking machine so he didn't get hangovers. Anyway,
Wow.
but he did no work for a year because, and when I mean no work, I mean he would day drink all fucking day, not bring in a single client. But he's in a great position, a very Mike Judge type situation where it's like we spent so much money, made such a big to do about hiring this guy, we can't fire him right away, otherwise we look stupid. So
Yeah.
it's just this staring contest for 365 days to the day where he's pulling
Wow.
in like 200 grand a year for doing nothing. Like I love the ingeniousness of this, the ingenuity of this, but like it multiply that by like 10,000. There's all sorts of that shit going on.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing just in general how inefficient the workplace is. I mean, we really have this notion that, I mean, once you're really deep in it, you kind of start to realize that, you know, it's like it's kind like it makes you understand the communists because the communists understand that most jobs are fake.
Yeah,
Like most jobs are actually just people sitting around adding absolutely no value at all. You
sending
know?
emails and
Yeah,
setting up
and it's
meetings
like
where no one talks about anything.
right. So if you could have a communism of just those people, it would actually make a lot of sense. The problem is there's like a few people of us in there who are like, no, fuck that. I want to actually do something. And, that's for whom communism doesn't work. We end up ruining communism because we're like hungry.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, the last agency I worked at, it was sort of is actually startup, a platform. I won't go into too many details, but there it's a massive conglomeration of a bunch of different businesses that they smashed together. But there's a lot of listeners who are in blue collar jobs and real work, and they'll say, "Oh, you pencil pushers." I'm like, you don't understand the feeling of working a job where you've been there long enough where you know the lay of the land, but you also know the company is full of morons. No one's looking over your shoulder, and you can fuck around all day. The amount of, and it's not a good way to be, but I feel like this is what it felt in a communist bureaucracy where it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know there's mail being exchanged. I know there's meetings. Everyone's busy. No one's doing anything. None of this makes sense. None of this works, but I'm in it, and it kind of doesn't matter what I do. So I can just write a short story over here or whatever
Yeah,
it might
well, I
be.
mean, and you really see this now. Do you know about Robert Conquest's 3 laws? Have you gotten into that yet?
No, no. Oh, that sounds familiar. What is that?
Okay, so
Just say
Robert,
it.
this is like a big kind of mold buggy part of our whole like. Have you seen the Distributist before? The Distributist has a great the Distributist video on like the intro to Moldbug is one of the
Oh
best like
yeah,
YouTube
I've
essays ever.
I've read a bunch of Yarvin stuff. We actually covered some unqualified reservations. I spoke to Dave on the show, and I quite like his content. So I'm not I didn't watch that Moldbug video specifically, but I'm aware of all these
Yeah,
guys individually.
so anyway, he roots a bunch of this. I the only reason I'm cutting you off is because I don't want to get too bogged down on this because everyone will get super fucking bored. But like a very singular tenet of the right, of the dissident right, of neo reaction, whatever you want to call it, is these 3 laws of this guy, this thinker named Robert Conquest. And the way these laws lay themselves out essentially explains the regulatory capture, the institutional capture of the left and why they're able to constantly capture every single institution. The laws are everyone is conservative or reactionary about what he knows best. 2, that's 1. 2, any organization not explicitly right wing will sooner or later become left wing. And 3, the behavior of any bureaucratic organization can best be understood by assuming that it is controlled by a secret cabal of its enemies. So the third one is very difficult to understand, and we don't even need to get rid of it into it. But the first and second, everyone is reactionary about what they know best, and any organization not explicitly right wing will sooner or later become left wing. What he's trying to get at there, what he's trying to like unpack, is just the nature of institutions. And the nature of institutions is what happens, right? They're launched by a founder who really cares about the mission, and he has his people with him who really care about the mission. But then over time, that institution gets filled up with people who aren't intimate with the thing, right? They're not intimate with the topic of the institution. They're just, inevitably they're coming from further outside the mission, right? Like if it's Budweiser, the Bud family used to wean its babies. The first thing they would give them was a little bit of beer, right? Like that family knew everything about beer. But over time, more and more people enter the company that don't know about that thing.
And sometimes
Therefore,
they seek them out. Like, we need a new mind behind this. So they'll find
yes,
someone who's
right.
almost hostile towards the company itself.
Exactly. And and that's why people become non-reactionary, non-conservative about the things that they're supposedly in charge of. And then that's why the second law comes in, which is that after a while, any institution that doesn't specifically say we are right wing in its bylaws, right, will inevitably become left wing. And the reason for that is essentially this communist instinct, right? It's an agency problem. If you are in control of a bunch of money or of a mission or of something that really is not involving you, right? Like if you're in control of a institution that the destiny of that institution doesn't really have anything to do with you personally, inevitably it's going to move left forever because the people just don't have the mission of keeping it um, non-egalitarian, right? Like it's the institution's just going to sort of dissolve into this egalitarian like resource giveaway zone, you know?
Yeah, it's almost like just this entropic force. Some people would call a
Yeah.
lot of the left wing that dysgenic force, but without getting into the biology, it's certainly an entropic force. And I'm reminded of two books we covered on the show a while ago. One is Bowling Alone, but more specifically, I was thinking of Exit, Voice, and Loyalty by Albert Hirschman.
Mm.
And that interesting phenomena that says that when you start to see the scenario you're outlining, there's a lot of high functioning individuals in the organization, like the smartest people will start to see the way things are going. And oftentimes it's the most competent and most skilled people who might be the first to leave. And you see this in not only in firms, but also in neighborhoods. And oftentimes, because they'll see which way the winds are changing, say, well, I'm going to get out while the getting's good to be the first out the door. But that causes a chain reaction. And eventually, the types of people who would have otherwise been capable of fighting this change are just gone. So all you have left are this sort of like middle glut who are kind of unhappy, but they don't actually have the ambition or verbal competency or whatever to plead a case. And then it's just them and the sort of the
Yes.
anti-force. And that's everywhere. That's neighborhoods, that's firms, that's a lot of places too.
I think the idea that they don't have the verbal acuity to even defend it is very interesting. What do you mean by that exactly?
A lot of individuals, they lack the communication skills to really establish what it is they believe. They know that they believe something. You can even see this in like devout religious individuals. If they are asked to outright plead the case for why they are correct or why they believe what they believe, they might have good reasons, but they just can't communicate it. They've never done it
Yeah.
before. And it's almost
Yes.
not natural for most people to be asked that. And same thing when I give an example, I'm like, if you the average person goes up against a highly competent flat earther, you're probably going to lose to the flat earther just because they have that toolbox that you don't have.
Yeah. But hold on. But what does this have to do? What was the book that you were mentioning that this
Oh, it's
has
called actually this is something I got from Curtis Yarvin. It's Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. It's a short book.
exit, voice, and loyalty? So what is the point of it? What does it say?
The voice was kind of tracking what he calls the decline in firms, and he says that
Oh
when
yeah.
individuals are presented with a choice, they kind of have three ways to control a situation and call it a vote or whatever. It's like you can choose to exit the system. That's one way to control what happens, or you
Oh.
can exact your voice within that system to try and change it. And some
Ah,
people
I
just don't
see.
exact their voice. And actually, you know what? There's this other book that we covered just
Very
recently.
cool. This is very cool. Yeah, this is like very much in the same discussion we're having.
You'd
I've
like
never
that.
heard of it.
There's this other one that's even more interesting. It's called In Groups by Wilfred Bion. This is more of a psychology book, but this was back in the 60s, right? And he was a very student of Freud and everything like that. But he made the case that in psychology and psychotherapy, it's usually on a one-to-one basis. But he said that's not how human beings operate. We operate as members of groups. And so he was a pioneer of group therapy. How do people behave when they're in a group? What's their group identity? Instead of just being a one-to-one individual thing, which is how most psychology is treated. And so he did all these experiments with the military and actually with the Tavistock Institute, for people who know who that is. Dun, dun, dun. But he did a series of experiments. He doesn't go into detail because he can't, but he kind of refers these stories and these things he learned from working with different types of groups and how people behave. And he said, a couple interesting phenomena are, it's like groups tend to emerge no matter what. People very rarely exist as an individual. A group forms almost as if it's its own thing. He made this really interesting point, and you might find this fascinating. He said, you are a member of a group in a sense, even if you reject yourself from the group. You know what I mean? Like, you are always existing in context of that group. Like, if you run into the woods, right, and go off grid and abandon society, you are still in a sense connected to that group because you're defined by it. You're defining yourself by your proximity away from it. So like, there's this idea of your group identity even existing if you're not a member of it. Anyway, the point being that when he's talking about leadership and how within groups leaders tend to emerge organically oftentimes, although he did make a point that oftentimes the most mentally imbalanced one will be elected as a leader. But anyway, he had made a point that he said, typically, I won't get off in too much of the details here, but basically he said, usually, even if it's that whole argument, what is it? Silence is compliance or silence is consent, something like that, where basically if you just go along with the leader says, psychologically, you actually do kind of agree with what they're saying. And a lot of people just lack the ability to rise up against a leader.
To do the voice part.
Yeah, they just don't know how to do it. Votes try and kind of solve for that, but most people, they don't know how to argue. They don't know how to express themselves. You almost need a leader to fight a leader. Most people aren't leaders. So you'll kind of fall to whoever the leader is almost like organically.
Yeah, that's very true. And you see these phenomenon happening like without anyone really trying. This is just how people organize themselves. I think it is fascinating to like people who don't have the voice simply just revert to loyalty, right? Because I don't know. I have no idea what the theory here is, but yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
Read the book. I think a mind like yours can really probably come away with something even a bit more intricate. But you see that a lot in society too. Like, a lot of people just go along with it. Even on our side of our political milieu, people will often talk about, like, what would it take for a proper revolution? Hypothetically, like a 20th century style revolution. And I think a lot of people have pointed out that, well, the problem is a lot of people are just very comfortable. A lot of people, they have not felt the compulsion to break away, to create a schism from society. And maybe in the 21st century, like, the 20th century rules don't apply to the 21st century, maybe.
Definitely. I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
It's the age of Aquarius thing, right? My friend Astral has a great podcast on this, which is, about how the age of Pisces ended, the age of the fish, which is the end of the zodiac. And now we're in the age of Aquarius. And the thing about the age of Aquarius is, like, everything is totally upside down. It's like the new start, right? Like, nothing is related to the past because the zodiac has, like, started over. So all the rules that we've had for all these past times, which is, in my mind, like, rules about scarcity, rules about sort of distance, the way that human beings have structured themselves, it's all of those things except, like, run in reverse. Like, now the problem is not scarcity, it's overabundance, just as an example. It's not like lack of connection, it's over connection. And so, yeah, I do think that, like, this new world that we're in, it's like a whole new set of problems. And we don't even really know what heroes and villains look like yet, because it's just so early on in this, like, new underwater world where everything's upside down.
Yeah. And you made a really great point there. And this is something I've said before. I think a lot of people would agree with the basic premise when I say that a lot of the political ideologies of the 19th and 20th century emerged due to the Industrial Revolution.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think, and I've looked into this pretty bit, I don't think we have seen a similar dominant ideology that has emerged from the Information Revolution. Not yet. The closest I could see is something like Nick Land. Like, a lot of the NRX guys were, like, getting into that. Like, the idea, who was I reading? It might have been Marshall McLuhan. where he was talking about how really the Industrial Revolution and the development of these new media changed how we think in processes, and the idea of multiplication of processes. That's like a new way of approaching the world. And a lot of new ideas came from that. But he said, even McLuhan said, like, the dawn of electricity granted the idea that everything is connected and instantaneous. Instead of a linear process, it's like everything operating at once. And the digital revolution, like, I don't think it's birthed like really a new ideology yet to grapple with how fucking insane it is
Yeah.
that that's such an information overload and an overabundance. Yeah, we're still kind of talking about like communism and fascism and these 20th
Right.
century
Right.
ideas, like the workers of the world. I'm like, what? No one knows what that means anymore. And to I guess the main point, a lot of that is a marketing problem. Like, people just fall in love with the aesthetics and the slogans and like the imagery, or they almost fall in love with commercials of World War II, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because they
Yeah.
understand that it's familiar to them, and it's almost
I
like,
think that's
yeah,
I think that's a very good point you're making. It's like, right, like communism and fascism sort of grew up to react against the bane of liberalism that had created the Industrial Revolution. And now we really, like, the whole thing got completely blown up. And now we're in this completely different world. Um,
yeah, like
and
almost
now it's like,
communism was obsessed
yeah,
with automation, and we're at the point where with AI we're automating automation. That's kind of fucking crazy.
right, right. And that, you mean like AI is automating automation? Automating automation. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'm not sold on AI though. I'm sort of a holdout of being awed by that.
I'm not impressed by it yet, because we a lot of us play around with AI. I think a lot of what people are imagining is like, oh, Skynet goes viral or something like that. You know what I was reading actually? There's this book. I don't think we covered on the last episode. It was like this collection of essays from like professors and academics about neurotechnology. And what do we do about neurotechnology? And what neurotechnology is, like any technology that boosts your brain power. And that could be, chips in your brain. That could be like neurotoxins, because they're looking at like we can use this to either boost our capabilities or use as a weapon against our enemies, like introducing like weird toxins to like make people confused and stuff. And this is a very serious book. This isn't a conspiracy theory book. This was like policy guys saying in very academic and government bureaucratic language, like, okay, this is going to happen, we need a code of ethics. And one thing they had mentioned, this is kind of what I'm getting at, was they said a lot of the innovations of the 19th and 20th century, they were kind of pioneered by the government and then released to the public. That's the story of the internet. That's the story of a lot of things. But they said, as we've gone through time, we've noticed that the technological development that we're doing on the state side is happening in tandem with the public. And one example they gave was the development of like drones. They like, we were developing drone technology the exact same time a lot of like private companies were. So they're like, okay, the problem with AI is that we're developing it and we're trying to be responsible, but everyone else is developing it as well. And it's not going to be one mega mind, but it could be like you can make AI designed to like fuck things up in unforeseeable ways. It's kind of like the three body problem, where it's like if you have two bodies orbiting each other, you can predict what they're going to do. You throw in a third body in the orbit, eventually it collapses. So I think what they're like
Wait a
is
second.
like,
So the three body problem is the name of the Vietnamese, the Chinese sci-fi book, right?
yeah, that's right. But it's named after a real problem in astrophysics where,
So what is the real problem? Because I equate third body problem with the dark forest. What is it? The dark forest
yeah,
explanation.
that's the trilogy. Basically, the three
Yeah.
body problem is, it's a part of the book. So the three body problem is if you have like two things in space, like two planets or two asteroids, whatever, and they're kind of in each other's orbit, a stable orbit, you can predict what they're going to do, how that orbit is going to do forever. The
Ah,
problem is if you introduce a third object into that orbit and that third object orbits around them, your ability to predict how it's going to orbit just goes to shit. And there's
really? Oh, that's
that
interesting.
one
So
extra variable
yeah.
is like eventually they collide or they spin off. It's
Mm,
eventually unstable. And in the book,
that's
that's
fascinating.
the story is that there's like an alien world that's orbiting around 3 suns, and it's all fucked up, and the alien race there is
Uh,
trying to figure out how to go to Earth.
so the
It
third
sounds like a
body
cool
problem
story.
is just like that the level of complexity by the third body introduced makes it impossible to predict the behavior.
Yeah, it's something to, and I think you could even take like a metaphysical approach to that if you wanted to, where
Wow.
it's like the yin and the yang. 2 things can be stable. 3 things, fuck, you can say that about
It's
relationships too
the
if you want.
argument against polyamory.
Basically, yeah. Like the third, there's something about us. I think
Yeah, it's got to be
I was
two, can't be three.
I was reading something like a lot of the old
Yeah,
guys too. They noticed that even in Rome, sometimes they had like 2 emperors. There's something about two that
yeah.
seems to be, fuck, who was it? I was reading something. It might have been like Hans Morgenthau, I think, Politics Among Nations, but he was saying that, like, we talk about the left right axis as if it's this unique American thing. Like, why is there left and the right? They should have a multiplicity of parties. And we do have that in Canada and have that in Europe. But what you notice is those parties somehow still seem to follow along the left right axis. And I think it was Morgenthau or one of the geopolitical guys that said, the left right. Oh, you know who it was? It was the book, The Network State. Anyway, the left right axis is just a function of government, and you could have as many parties as you want, but they still seem to fall. They find a way to fall along this axis no matter what. So it's almost like in whatever human endeavor or human organization you have, it's going to fall along this sort of duality. Now, I don't know if that's completely true, but it sounds interesting and true enough. I'm going off in a
Yeah,
lot of different
wow.
directions here, but I'm drawing a lot of
No,
lines through
dude, that's
dots right
what
now.
I've learned is that's what makes a good podcast. I've been doing this for a long time, and I think I just realized, I just like understood that a great talk podcast is all about embracing the tangents. That's really what makes a good talk pod.
Getting back to you, I did want to know about what
On
is
that
it
note,
like. We talked about your story in law, and now you're in marketing and advertising. Are you happier here? Are you more fulfilled? And what do you like
oh
about
yeah,
it?
a million zillion times. I mean, so just to get back to my story, so I graduated law school. I passed the California bar, so I still finished up, and I wish I could say that it was like, hindsight 2020. It's very obvious to me now that I hated it so much I could have never done it. But back then I was still unsure. I was kind of like, well, maybe I should do it, maybe I shouldn't. And those were really the worst years. The worst years, you can pretty much deal with anything, or I can, besides uncertainty. Uncertainty is really just a killer for me. So the worst days, even still, or the worst times of my life were when I wasn't sure, right? So those first years, at least career wise, I was still unsure. I didn't know, I tried to get a job in law, by the way. It's not like I moved to LA and, bar passage in hand. I didn't just immediately say screw law. I tried kind of tacitly, like not super hard, but I tried to apply to firms. I mean, it was 2012, so it was like the worst year of legal hiring I think ever. So it's not like I had people. It's not like I had jobs right there. But had I had an easy, high-paying corporate lawyer job, I probably would have taken it, to be honest. And
Guys,
then I
a
was
quick
definitely
tangent.
not.
Did you notice a huge cultural shift between New Orleans and LA from a legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, I mean, I wouldn't even know, right? Because I never worked at a firm here. I went to like a few Beverly Hills Bar Association meetings, and saw those disgusting, horrible people there. But that certainly don't exist in New Orleans. But no, I mean, like, look, I never even really practiced. So what happened was to make a long story super short, the first job, I stumbled into a job here. First job was as an assistant, a personal assistant to a gay, very powerful agent who worked out of a house in the Hollywood Hills, which is very rare, and had like a tribe of like 6 gay dudes who worked in this house with him.
Oh no.
And I was like the one straight dude. I show up. I have a law degree and I'm me. So they make the huge mistake of hiring me. And I make the huge mistake of accepting this job because I'm desperate. I'm literally fucking desperate. I have no jobs. I have no money. So I take this like $40,000 a year job as a personal assistant to this guy who's like the agent of huge celebrities, but only for their advertising deals. So this was actually my first foray into advertising, really. It's pure evil. This was my first entree to Hollywood, and I'm super glad that I did it now because I saw Hollywood. I saw the guts of Hollywood, and like
that sounds like something I would make up, like a story of Hollywood. Yeah, I worked in like a gay agent's house that's full of gay men.
It was unbelievable, and it was so unbelievably evil. Like it was exactly as horrible as you would imagine. In every,
I feel like we could spend 3 hours just in this alone. I want to.
People are always really interested in this story. It's funny because like I wish I'd taken better notes because like even then I was starting to be a writer, but it was so traumatic and I hated it so much that I didn't take like good enough notes. But people love this story whenever I tell it. But yeah, I mean, I lasted 3 months before I got fired because I just couldn't. It was, if you, I
just
can't
do the gay sex. That was
exactly. I can't even like tell you how horrible this job was day to day. It was the worst imaginable thing. Like you can't even imagine. Personal assistant to super powerful gay mansion advertising agent in Hollywood. Like it was the worst thing in the world. And he was exactly as horrible, like in every way, as just pure evil. Like a person who exists to hurt the world. For sure.
It's like Ari Gold's assistant, but as his own boss.
Except Ari Gold. Yeah, exactly. It's like Lloyd. Exactly. It's like Lloyd being the except he was Jewish, so it would be more like gay Ari Gold. Like that was basically who this was. If he had like manufactured a couple babies for himself. Like he had two babies that were just his, that had been made for him. It was like it was hideous beyond all reckoning. And, I had never seen anything like that before. I'm from Chicago. I lived in New York for a couple of years. I lived in New Orleans. There is nothing like the LA Hollywood vibe, which is dead now, by the way. That was killed with Me Too, with Weinstein, all that shit of like abusive bosses that like throw the phone in your head type of shit. That's gone. Tech has conquered Hollywood. Like it's amazing people don't realize this more, but like that type of character in Hollywood is dead. I mean, there's, a few of them still hanging on. I'm sure this guy's hanging on, but he's probably terrified now. He certainly could never treat anybody the way he treated me, because now women run Hollywood, not men. So
once they saw Kevin Spacey go down, they knew that
exactly. No, once Kevin Spacey and Bryan Singer were done, like these like guys who were deaf. I mean, like, look, did I ever see anything that would say that they were like into pedo stuff? No, I never did. But I am very confident that they were hanging out with Kevin Spacey and Bryan Singer and doing whatever those guys were doing, which is not.
I always tell people when you see a gay man wearing diapers, it's not because of age play.
Yeah, right, exactly. Anyway, so I lasted 3 months of this thing. It was the most miserable time probably of my entire life. Because again, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Am I going to be a lawyer? Am I an agent? Am I a businessman? Am I a creative? I had no fucking clue. And then after that, I got fired, totally down on my luck. I'm like writing screenplays. I'm living in this complete shithole in Hollywood with these two actresses. And I stumble into a job at 72 and Sunny, which at the time was the number one ad agency basically in the world. It was the number one agency in the world. I'm not even exaggerating. It was like, every year it won best ad agency in the world. It had all the best accounts. It had Google, it had Call of Duty, it had Carl's Jr. Anything cool 72 was like the spot at that time.
I'm looking at their site right now for people who are interested in their clients. We have NFL, Adobe, fucking Under Armour. We've got like everything you use.
Yeah. Right. They were the best of the best. And so, I so the job I had gotten was kind of like in um, the legal-ish department. It's something called business affairs for people who are familiar with advertising. It's basically like the licensing department, not very creative. There's kind of like pretensions of being like a little bit creative in business affairs, um, which I certainly like took to the limit. But anyway, this was my intro into advertising. And I saw the advertising world. And, this was like amazing. It was like this world that I was like, oh my God, like this is what I've been waiting for. It's the polar opposite of a law firm. It's the hottest girls you've ever seen. Everybody's like, having these great meetings all day. Everybody's being creative. It's like there's cool concerts. The space is beautiful. We're talking about movies. We're talking about music. I was just like, holy shit! Like this is what I've been waiting for. Like I found the industry for me.
Yeah, especially for people who are curious. As a young man, if you go into an agency, he's not lying. Like even in Toronto, the big agencies, you walk in, open bar. They try and emulate Google. Like someone let them know, like, oh, Google, they got nap rooms and free cereal, and they said we're doing all that shit, and they'll take you to like weird parties. They'll rent out a club, and even my wife, it's like, oh yeah, they gave us free tickets to go see the fucking Weekend. She's like, I don't like the Weekend. I'm like, but you understand that this is a big deal.
Yeah, no, and this was the best of this at the time. This was like, the place to be doing this. And, I met some amazing people, but I was in this horrible situation because I was in business affairs. I was basically the stamp boy. I literally had a stamp and I would go around like stamping paperwork. So, the cool kids, or at least I thought I realized later I was wrong about this, but I thought who the cool kids were the copywriters, and the creatives, right? The way that the advertising world works is the sort of core team of in today's world, or at least it used to be for a long time, was a art director, so a designer, and a copywriter. And those two would come together and come up with the ideas for the campaign and everything like that. So from afar, from what I could see, was that those were the cool kids. Those were the like cool people at 72 and Sunny. And guess what? I happened to already be a writer. I was writing for Vice at the time. I was writing for LA Weekly. I was kind of like, making my way as like a kind of low-level, bottom-feeding gonzo writer, right? Because that was what I was sort of doing on the side. And I loved that type of writing. I've always been a creative nonfiction guy. Like that's my thing. I don't know if you've seen the Carousel, but the biggest pieces on the Carousel are actually, I wrote this piece called There's Gonna Be a War in Montana. And that's went hyper crazily viral. And that's just pretty much gonzo writing. I tied into propaganda a little bit, but so the pieces just kind of came together in my head of like, well, I love this world of advertising. I am a writer, so why don't I just go be a copywriter? And that was pretty much, long story short. I ended up getting fired from 72 also, another funny story. But after that, I went and I bartended for several years, and I went back to portfolio school to like get my proper copywriting portfolio. And, that was sort of the beginning of my foray into advertising. But, I never, I never made it to the heights of like my specialty kind of became branding. So I really wish that I could say that I marched triumphantly back into 72 as like a creative director and, showed them how it was done, but that never really happened. I made it to the heights of the industry in branding agencies, but branding agencies are a little bit of a niche. And actually, Will is a branding agency. We're not an advertising agency, really. I mean, we are, but in terms of the part of the industry we're in, we're more in branding.
Yeah, I worked in a branding agency myself when I was in Toronto. That was one of the best agencies I
Yeah.
worked at. It closed. A lot of them, the mid to smaller mid-sized one, closed down during COVID for a variety of reasons. But I really dug this one. I loved like branding workshops, and I
Yes.
find that even when I get a new client, if it's for anything, I find myself going through these core branding exercises because
Yep.
without that, you don't really have a starting point.
Totally.
Um,
Totally agree.
unless you're just like, oh, I'm a guy who runs campaigns on Google. But even then,
Yeah.
I'm like, I kind of, I want to know because odds are they don't have anything. Odds are, especially if
Yeah.
you're working with small businesses. I prefer small businesses at this point in my career. Having a one-to-one relationship, whoever the stakeholders might be.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just my thing. I've worked with startups. I fucking hate startups at this point. Like there's you meet the worst personalities doing that. Sometimes you get lucky and meet a
Yeah.
great startup founder. A lot of the times they are just like it's lousy with scammers. It's lousy with liars and
Yeah.
psychopaths.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe my radar is off, but everyone is just go to these fucking conferences and bring a high powered rifle. I don't know. I'm, I'm burned out on a lot of stuff, but I do have, people always are surprised when I say I have a genuine affinity for marketing. And
Yeah.
I like it, and I like it to the point where if I wasn't getting paid for it, I do it for free. I give out free advice all the time. People who are like trying to get a thing going, get a business, a
Yeah.
project. I'm like, have you tried? Like, do you know what a project management software is? Try that. That'll solve a lot of your problems. Just
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. And honestly, for me, I don't know if it's this way for you. The more boring the business is, the better because I need to figure out what makes it interesting to the other person. So,
Yeah.
like anything like niche manufacturing, like one of my clients years ago, they just manufactured anchors, and the guy had been doing that for fucking 40 years.
Yep.
And I'm like, take me into your world, make me
Yeah,
understand this.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
Dude, I do
amazing.
the exact same thing, man. We should talk. I do the exact same thing. Like, yeah, we have some weird esoteric clients, and it's fun to do these workshops and like figure out what makes you interesting. What is the core of why you're doing this and what you stand for.
Because
Even
so
if
many
it's like,
businesses feel like they need to like emulate other businesses. But I'm like, no, like,
yeah,
feel, like what makes you interested into this? And they usually
exactly.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Little guys like there's a lot of businesses. My dream list of businesses I ended up working with. I like construction's kind of difficult. Like worked with construction firms. The problem with those guys is a lot of them are used to working with contractors, and they're used to used to being slave drivers. They are used to working with types of personalities that you need to stay on them and crack the whip, otherwise they'll fuck you over. And my job is always like, I'm not that guy. You don't need to micromanage me. Like
Yeah.
I'm not here to rape you. I'm here to help you. But their entire world is dealing with people who are trying to fuck them every day. And
Yeah.
and, and that's why I love, getting into different industries. I need to learn the parlance. I need to learn like their stress levels. Dealing with lawyers is way different than dealing with carpentry guys or small businesses or like, software as a service people. Like those might be the worst just because I don't know. I was listening to this guy, Marco Papic. He wrote this really interesting book called Geopolitical Alpha. He's like a finance guy and a geopolitical strategist. And he was saying that the era of software as a service or SaaS companies is over. That like the smart money is not even trying to do that. And I agree with that. Because I maybe we have as many as we need. Maybe we have as many Ubers as we need. We've automated everything. But what are your feelings on that? Do you think that software as a service is even like would you guys who are getting into that right now, even guys on our side, would you say that's a smart bet or no?
Well, that's quite a pivot. Getting into is SaaS relevant?
Maybe that
Um,
was too much of a pivot because we are still talking about your life. We can go
no,
back
no,
to
it's
that.
fine. I'm happy to answer it. It's just, I mean, SaaS is a little bit of one of these ZERP phenomenons, isn't it? Zero interest rate phenomena, in the sense that the reason why everybody wanted SaaS is because it looks really good from the outside. Why? Because if you create a SaaS platform, ideally, you just make a big bunch of code. You don't really have to do much to maintain that code besides just kind of tinker around with it and do updates and stuff, right? So it's very low uh, overhead. You spend all your money on sales, so you get a bunch of annoying people going and selling your stupid button clicking software to, you know, the fat 45-year-old white dog mom who controls the budget at every single fucking brand in the world. And you convince them that they absolutely need your new, you know, like tinkerer with 3 R's, fucking like project management software. And this project management software gives a bunch of other fat women something to pretend like they're doing all day, right? So they can say, "Oh, I'm so busy because my tinker reporting is behind," you know, even though nobody gives a one fuck about the tinker report at all. So, you know, it's very low overhead. You just spend everything on sales, which is free anyway, because you just give salespeople a commission. And that's why, and you know, it's all digital. It doesn't take a lot of capital, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason why SaaS companies were getting, so I think the metric is for the valuation of a company, very roughly speaking, like 3 times your yearly revenue or something, whereas SaaS companies were getting 7 times valuation. So that's why everybody wanted to be a SaaS program, because in the eyes of investors, in the eyes of VCs and buyers, more reliably buyers, you could sell out for a shit ton more money, right? So smart guys, especially kind of smart left brain guys, were like, well, fuck, I'm just going to make myself a little SaaS company, exit for, you know, 50 million because we're making this much money a year in sales. So SaaS was very exciting for a lot of people, but this was also under zero interest rates where the actual profitability of the company didn't really matter that much. It was more just how much revenue are we taking in, et cetera. So, in my opinion, I'm hoping that the next phase of technology will all be platforms that help us use less SaaS, you know,
Yeah.
SaaS that helps us use less SaaS. So, you know, things in the world that help us to free us from the button clicking software that actually, at the end of the day, did any single one of these programs actually give us any time back at all? Of course not, right? It's not that any of these, you know, all these SaaS programs are supposed to make it so easy. None of them, not a single one, made it so that we're less busy at all. So hopefully people will realize that.
One thing I noticed working in agencies is that even the top agencies, maybe not the top, but a lot of the top ones, were like playing catch up with whatever was trendy. So, like, I remember when I was in school, this would have been a long time ago, but they're like, you know, apps are the new thing. Everyone needs an app. And I was setting up my phone the other day just because I had to re-download a bunch of apps and it's recommending apps and it's like why the fuck does KFC have an app? Why does
Yeah.
every single fast food place has an
Yeah.
app on top of Uber, on top of all that shit? I'm like there's just too much shit. None of this is easy anymore. But if you were in marketing all that long time ago, you were probably thinking, I need to get into app development. My big pitch is start an app. And there's a lot of people who did that. Like there's a lot of pitch decks that were like, have you considered having your own app? And for a while, people thought that was a real good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I don't know, like it just went away. But you know, I think you probably have some insight on this too. I'm like, if you think of the types of personalities, and look, this is me segueing back to marketing. If you pay attention to the types of personalities who are in a lot of these agencies and the types of personnel that are there, you'd be surprised at how few of them seem genuinely creative. Especially, you know, the type of, I've seen a lot of like accounts people get into strategy. You would think
Mhm.
that creative people the art directors, the copywriters get a strategy, but I know it's like a lot of just like bullshit. People who think they're analytically minded, who all their entire job is just been managing accounts. They're not even sales. They're not even getting clients. They're the ones you just you give a bunch of clients to, and their job is to keep them happy, which is
Yeah.
usually just bullshitting them. And then they're like, "Oh, now you're in strategy. This is the last person you should have in strategy," because they don't understand how to do anything, but they also don't understand how to say no. So they're an extra little gear in the cogs that just makes it's more efficient, but it makes it worse. And
Dude, I
that's
think
so
that
much agency.
I think the strategy, like, you know, in Mad Men, uh, what had the strategist back then is the planner who comes in with like the, you know, the binder full of insights and puts it on Don's desk, and Don just immediately throws it into the garbage.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I have never, I mean, and I feel bad because I have some friends that are strategists who are great, but strategy to me is complete bullshit. Like, it is never used. It never matters. It doesn't actually influence anything. I mean, the strategies that are good are actually campaign concepts, right? It's like, yeah, sure. If you have some really great data insight or some really great insight about your customers, like, fine, that can lead to great campaigns and great marketing. But I don't really think that's like 0.00001% of strategy. Most strategy is just bullshit painting on like slides, right? It's just like, here's a bunch of strategy, and it's like it doesn't actually do anything, and nobody looks at it or cares. It's just like kind of a dance.
And I've got this thesis, and I want to know what your opinion on it is to see if I'm incorrect. But first of all, my wife works in marketing as well. And she works at an agency, and she does mostly campaign planning, campaign execution, social media. Big partnership with Meta specifically, but then also TikTok. There's some interesting things at TikTok, but mostly Meta. And one thing that she's noticed, and I've noticed over the past few years, and this is related to strategists and planners, is that no one really trusts the data anymore. And so intrepid listeners might be familiar with the concept of dead internet theory, which is a big, scary sounding thing, but it's it's a realistic idea where most of the internet doesn't seem to be real or doesn't seem to be active. Now,
Yeah.
part of this is proven because we know through studies that most people check the same like 4 to 6 web pages every day for their entire lives. There's not a lot of activity outside of social media platforms. But the second is that the most important thing that I'm noticing is that a lot of the numbers that we're getting from platforms don't seem to be real. And this is something
No,
she's
yeah.
noticed, but it's also something I noticed. Even with Google, when you're running a Google ad, they will give you analytics and how many phone calls are made through the ad. That sounds good, looks great in a presentation until I phone the client and say, "Did you get an influx of calls this month?" And they'll say no. It's just sometimes they'll
Yeah.
just they give fake numbers. And
Yeah, I
when
think
I
they
tell
definitely
people
do.
that, my wife had worked at big agencies just like me, the amount of lying that these agencies are
Yeah.
doing in presentations, they're lying about views, they're lying about clicks, they're lying about there's agencies at the highest level stealing budget, they're giving them a discount. Like, it's just made up numbers. And also, there was a big controversy recently with a lot of big name influencers saying that, like, I'm not seeing conversions, I'm seeing big numbers, but none of that's translating to sales. It all seems to be botted. It all seems to be fucking fake. And I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
all fake. I'm just saying I don't think both creators or platforms actually understand or have the capacity or even interest in telling fake numbers from real numbers. I think a lot of it's a big fucking fugazi, and
Yeah.
people are starting to notice to the point. And also, here's the other thing, that since I started in the industry, the amount you're allowed to target audiences has gotten more and more restricted. You used to be able
Right.
to target based on fucking anything on Facebook. It was
Yeah.
ridiculous. You could target based on race. You could
Yeah.
target based on all
Right.
kinds of
Right.
shit. Now you can't. And they're trying to move you towards their machine learning version of running campaigns. And my feeling is that they just don't know how to target anymore. and you're not allowed to target. So we're almost returning to an old style of marketing advertising, because the stuff that seems to work still is the same logic that led to fucking Ogilvy making cool ads and billboards and shit. It's just good creative
Exactly. No,
running
yeah.
based on impressions. All the targeting, all the data, it's fucking out.
It's
But
such horseshit.
if you
Yeah, no,
design a
I agree.
good ad, it still seems to work. But then it's just, you gotta have the creative. That's my feeling. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's very well put, and I think that that is exactly right. I think when you peek behind the scenes to these numbers, especially the numbers that are being used to sell you on things, like as you're saying, like Google impressions or Facebook views, or in campaigns, I think they're all bullshit. And I think, like, yeah, oh, market testing, like I've been inside these big agencies and they do market testing, but it's like, it's not real market testing where you get a bunch of people in the room and you like ask them their opinion on like the new taco or whatever, which I've seen I've been in and I've seen and I've run those types of market testing, like the old school types. And they're interesting. I still don't really think there's any point in doing it. Group. What do you call it? Group testing. What do they call it in
They call them
movies?
focus groups.
Focus grouping.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen that stuff, but now all that's been replaced with like digital surveys, and like Facebook has this thing called brand lift studies,
Yeah, my
right?
wife does that a lot.
Yeah, and it's just total bullshit. It's like it's supposedly like like Facebook surveys a bunch of people and asks them, is your opinion of this brand better after seeing this ad? And some middle manager at an agency gets to go back to their boss and be like, look, the Facebook brand lift study has gone up 2.5%. Like, wow, like pat me on the head.
Yeah.
And
You're
it's
doing
just
that to
total
keep your fucking
horseshit.
job. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all CYA. Like, do you really think like the people answering these Facebook surveys are paying any attention at all? And even if they are paying attention, like, it's obvious that Facebook just serves this to people who fill them out favorably every fucking time, even at that. So I think you're right. All these metrics are really warped and self-serving. And the only thing that really matters is, you can tell when something makes a splash, right? Like, I'm a blogger, right? I've been a blogger for 11 years, very long time. When you write a blog that makes an impact, you can tell immediately. Like, people will email you, people will message you, you'll hear about it, other places will write about it. Like, you'll get a hit. You get a hit. That's how you can just tell. Whereas you're not gonna, like, oh wow, this had a brand lift of X amount. That's not a hit. That doesn't count. That's not real. And so, yeah, I think you really should. Hopefully, all this will revert to people just caring about, the actual quality and the actual response from the ads.
Yeah, or have it employing minds that understand what it takes to hit. And you have this article on the Carousel that I thought was interesting, the vibe shift to destroy a marketing world. And it's all
Yeah.
about the hype dad.
Yeah.
And you described the archetype of so many creative directors that I'd seen in my career. And the overall gist of the article was that, these people are finding themselves out of luck as the vibe is shifting, and they were sort of the cool, woke, older, usually white guys, but now that's not cool anymore. Now they're out, and there's so many of those types of creative directors who just don't seem to understand what's cool anymore. Was that be a correct assessment?
Well, so this notion of hype dads, it was sort of an extension of an idea that my friend Sean Monahan had. So Sean Monahan, speaking of strategists, is like the world's best advertising strategist, although he doesn't think of himself that way. He's really an artist. But he came up with Normcore. He's kind of famous. He used to run this thing called K-hole, that in the advertising world, like when I was at 72, everybody was obsessed with K-hole, which were these kind of like, culture reports, about trends and things. And he had a short little blurb on, so you've heard of the vibe shift, right?
I wanted you to explain that because I'd heard of it, and then I got it from your article here. But for people who have heard it but don't really know what it is, would you be able to explain it?
So the vibe shift effectively refers to. So Sean Monahan also came up with the vibe shift. So about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, um, something happened in culture where we had been hegemonically blindly left all the way down to the edge of culture. So the cool kids, even the coolest of the cool kids, were still 100% left wing, right? Like there was nothing cool about being right wing at all for a long time. You know, people kind of forget this. I mean, maybe dating back to punk rock, the early, Joy Division, kind of Nazi signaling stuff. Uh, Culture since the 80s had been just going further and further left for a really long time. And there weren't cool figures on the right. It was still, people viewed the right wing as a bunch of, neocons, basically. But as we all know, as you know, Frog Twitter had been boiling up, had been kind of like happening for a little while, right? There'd been this slight swing going on in sort of a separated parallel universe. The vibe shift, in a very, very broad stroke way, even though many people have misunderstood it, was something that happened when essentially cool culture, so the edge of culture, largely in Manhattan, shifted right a little bit. And Red Scare is the best example of this. You know what I mean?
I've actually cited them before because they've been on a lot of people's radar for a while, and noticing their shift from just like open, I would say it went from like either kind of anime socialist or straight up like Zizek style communism, but to something like almost like Tradcath now, but like eye
Yes.
roll Tradcath, whatever you might
I
call
roll
that.
Tradcath. Yep, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so all the kids started signaling, oh, I'm becoming Eastern Orthodox. All the girls who are rich Jewish girls are becoming actually Catholic. It was this moment in culture where you could kind of feel that things had changed, right? You could feel that people had sort of stopped wanting to play by the rules of wokeness anymore. And a lot of people who were formerly left wing, like the Red Scare girls, God bless them, made it cool to be right wing. They made it hot, really. They made it hot more than cool, right? Like they made it okay to be a dorky, right leaning girl who takes thirst trap pictures of her tits and is hot, right? And for me, actually, the vibe shift was deeply important because I decided to launch Will for real, as ostensibly a based agency right when I saw the vibe shift happening. And I saw the vibe shift happening because I I'd been languishing in this right wing sphere forever, kind of coming in and out. I've been friends with Delicious Tacos, who I don't know if you know who that is, but he's kind of like, do you know Delicious Tacos? Yeah. So I'd been friends with him forever, man, and I'd been promoting him forever. I've been promoting Delicious Tacos since 2016. And we'd been friends, we've been like in real life friends. And, I'd been like a booster of his forever, saying that he's the best and blah, blah, blah. And we'd held many readings with him for years. And it was always a bunch of fucking angry dudes, people who didn't really know who anybody was. We'd been working on this forever. And of course, once I left the scene and went deep into branding, was like, fuck this whole thing. As I was gone, the cool needle shifted, unbeknownst to me, to the right. And I only learned this because Tacos invited me to a reading of his, and I'd never been invited to a Tacos reading before, ever. And I'd been, he'd never had a reading here. And I was like, what? Like, this is weird. I've never heard of Tacos doing a reading that I didn't organize for him. And so I'm like, all right, I'll go to this reading. And it's at the Ace Hotel, which is like, funnily enough, where I bartended. And I was like, weird. This sounds like really advanced. And I show up at this reading. This is like 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. Yeah, this is like a year and a half ago. Like not this summer, but last summer. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, there's going to be a handful of people, like how I used to always do it, a few nerds. And it is mobbed. There's like 120 people there listening to tacos read, listening to these few other kind of like scenestery guys read. And I'm just like, what the fuck happened? Like, how did culture had like shifted so that now all these hot girls were watching tacos read? Whereas before, these guys were just complete internet nerds. They had no real following. I mean, they had no following outside of like a bunch of angry guys online,
You
but
know what's
somehow,
interesting
yeah,
is,
sorry.
so just before you go on, similar anecdote is that there's a friend of mine who I chat with by the name of Arno. He's a
Yeah, I think I
straight,
know Arno.
yeah,
I think
straight
I've
up
seen
communist, but he also complains about black people. So he's like, he's in the
yeah,
strange space, right? But he had made a
yeah.
comment because he's always kind of getting on the dissident right, complaining about them for being chuds and whatnot. But he had made a comment about how this is what all the idiots are into now, and that's where like it's easy money. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Are you saying we're popular now? Like something had happened. I didn't even notice it
Yeah,
happening, but it sounds like when I
yeah.
hear the left complain about us, they're complaining about us because we're where the money is. We're where the trendy shit is happening, which
Well, we're
I
not
was
where
not.
the money is. We're not where the money is. I'll tell
Well,
you.
well,
I'll tell you that it's definitely not where the money is.
well.
But yeah,
Here's the
it's
thing
where the
that
cool.
might be changing. That there
I'll
might be
tell
a
you.
sea shift as more cool, quote unquote cool people get involved, then the money follows. Because if it's just a bunch of like true like antisocial guys, maybe that is the larger trend that's going. I had some people like leftists always complain. They think the fascists are in control. They think the right wing is making all the money. They're obviously
Well,
wrong.
that's because they're insane and it's
Yeah,
completely
like
not
when you listen
invested.
to like fucking like Sam Cedar or someone, they're like, well,
Yeah,
obviously all of the right wing is making billions of dollars. I'm like,
yeah. And
uh,
well, but when they say right wing, though, what they actually mean is left wing. They just don't. They don't understand that. But anyway, yeah. Sorry, keep going.
but there is like a shift that occurred where like think like you'd said the vibe shift occurred. Let me ask you this: do we have an indication on what caused the vibe shift? Can we pin something like a vibe shift on a cause, or is it just generative? Do you think?
I mean, what do you mean generative?
Is it so complicated and intricate? It's because some people will say like, oh, this shift is natural. They'll say it's like a pendulum swing. Things went too far left, and then they're right, and they're going right now. I'm not sure. I believe it's just going back and forth forever. I do think there's some kind of cause. Like, was there a movement that made the right cool, or
What do you
what
think? I mean,
caused?
what do you mean it's not just back and forth forever? Like, what do you think it would
Well,
have been?
people, there seems to be this belief, especially with Gen Xers, I think, where they're like, oh, it went too far left politically, and now it has to go too far right. And once it goes too far right, then it'll go too far left.
Yeah.
Like it's inevitable. I'm not sure it's just this pendulum swinging left and right forever. There can be a point where maybe the pendulum stops and things are just right wing, but I don't know. Like, maybe it's not that case in America because maybe, and this is getting into a kind of a, there's this idea in there's this idea in Empire and Communications by Harold Innis. If you his is about language and media, and he said if you conceptualize society sort of like in a de Juvenelian way, like academic agents always about this, but the center of power and the periphery of power. The center of power would be like the emperor, government, whatever. Then there's the intermediate sphere, which is like institutions and stuff. Then there's the people on the outside. Then there's the fringes of society, and there's a model that can explain how media develops across time, where a lot of new media is adopted by the periphery, then it's absorbed into the center eventually, but that kind of
Yes.
makes it static and dead. But then there's always new things generated within the periphery. Now, the model, if we transpose it onto the modern day, that's almost saying like, okay, the periphery of society will always adopt the opposite political ideas of whatever the mainstream is. And maybe that's, so it's always going to be, if the mainstream is left, then the cool periphery, because this is where the cool ideas happen. This is where the innovative ideas happen, and kind of the fringes. It will just be the opposite of whatever the mainstream is. Now, is that the case? I don't know. That almost seems too low resolution, but maybe it's not. I don't know. It just, I'm hesitant to accept the model where it's like, well, woke got too powerful, so now everyone needs to go far right. I'm trying to think, like, is there something within these ideas though that make them attractive, rather than just rebellion for the sake of rebellion? I guess that's trying what I'm getting at.
I mean, okay, so the Dime Square girls, right? The girls of Dime Square, the Annas and the Dashas, particularly these like kind of mini Gertrude Stein rich Jewish girls who like run Forever magazine, for example, who, again, God bless all these people. I'm certainly not criticizing them, because without them, I'd be way worse off, right? I mean, these people are the crucibles. I don't even really know what that word means, but I think the crucibles of the reason why we're like in business, like we're in business and they're the reason why. So I certainly can't say anything bad about them, but I believe that yes, they are doing it solely because it's the opposite of what their parents want them to do. Right. I mean, edginess is edginess, and edginess has to, in order to be edgy today, you pretty much have two choices. Either you go ever so slightly right, right? Which is like barely right. We're talking about just the tiniest little bit right. Or you go so far left that you're getting face tattoos and getting your dick chopped off, right? So it's like, those are your two choices. Either you go like so deep into chaos that you're unrecognizable, or you toy around with like the slightest modicum of racist or traditional thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like, we've been so well trained to think of racism as evil that still the majority of people are more willing to chop their dick off than be thought of as racist, literally. But in reality, if you really think about it, is it really that bad to be racist? Is that really that terrible? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Sure, acting on it is bad, but is it really that bad to have a racist thought? Like, no, it's not bad. Who cares? We all have fucking racist thoughts. Everybody in the history of the world has. It's not that bad. You know what I mean? But we've been trained to think of it as like the most satanic thing imaginable. So, I think that in that sense, it is just rebellion. I think that we've been pushed so far. The hegemonicness of the left and the extremity of it has gone so far. And I blame this on the Longhouse, by the way. But, that's kind of a different conversation. That, of course, if you're going to make it impossible, like so forbidden to be right wing at all, the kids are going to be right wing. It's just the fucking way that it is. You know what I mean? This is the beauty of humanity, right? I mean, this is what we do so well, is it bounces back and forth. The larger question of, the socio-political development of liberalism over centuries, of which fascism and communism were both reactions, as you've already said. The question of liberalism as the core of our lives, that's a very good question. And that's something that is really going to be, in my opinion, like the age of Aquarius, right? That's going to be the fundamental question that's answered in these next 2,000 years. The next 2,000 years are going to be about the battle of liberalism, global liberalism, so globalism, right? Like a single liberal global government versus tradition, nationalism, localism. That's the next 2 centuries are going to be dedicated to that, right? And we're just starting. I mean, that battle is just gearing up. We haven't even had one. I mean, in a way, Russia is kind of like the first hot conflict of that battle. I mean, that I'm sure people who know foreign affairs, I mean, maybe like Serbia, right? I guess, yeah, NATO bombing Serbia maybe would be really the first one. But, again, I'm not an international, I'm certainly not a war expert. I'm not an international affairs expert, but this is just kind of how I see the landscape.
That's a very fascinating opinion and appraisal of the situation. I think you're essentially correct on that as well. And unfortunately, I do think I need to put a hard stop on the interview right now because I do need to get going. Because
Oh, good, man.
I know we could keep going on this for 3 hours. I'd love to have you back or talk to you again, however you'd like to, because we didn't even really breach the surface on all the stuff I wanted to talk about on the articles that I had read.
Oh, good,
I'd love to talk about this. There's a lot of good stuff on the Carousel. And I just want to remind people to check that out at thecarousel.substack.com. You can also find the Disgraced Propagandist on Twitter or X at Disgraced Prop. And for those who are more interested in the hard branding agency side of this, check out Will the Agency at willtheagency.com. And you got a whole spread there about what it is you do and more detail on your work. And I just wanted to thank you very kindly. I had a fantastic talk with you. I'd love to talk to you again sometime soon.
Totally, man. Me too. I'll have you on mine. We gotta. I'll pay the thing back, and I want to hear all about what you do as well. So yeah, well, I'll definitely let's organize you coming on the Carousel ASAP.
Absolutely, I can be there with bells on. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.